Interim Challenge Director for Transforming Construction. This is one of the Wave 2 of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund programs. I'm going to give you a bit of context as to what the Industrial Strategy is, what the program's about, and then that'll hopefully set you up to understand what we're trying to achieve from the competition when Ewa takes you through it. So the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is kind of the money bit of the industrial strategy. It's there to help sectors transform or grow from a low base. By putting in place a lot of things, help them overcome the innovation barriers to do so. Hands up who has ever applied to Innovate UK for money before. Forget everything you know about applying to us. This is UKRI now, and Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund's quite a bit different. So it's worth really getting a feel for the differences between that. It'll feel very similar applying to us, but this isn't generic R&D funding. This isn't it isn't there as some of the kind of funding we've done in the past, really specifically to help you grow, and we care about you as a business, and if you take a different direction in the program, that's fine, because really it's about where you end up. We still care about businesses growing, but with the ISCF money, we really, really care that we meet the objectives of the program. So we're there to solve really clearly articulated challenges that are societal issues. And we want the sectors to evolve to a position where they're able to do that. So unless every investment we make will be very ruthlessly targeted on solving those challenges, and the monitoring and the kind of way those projects will be followed will be to help us decide whether you really are helping us get towards solving that challenge. And for that reason, I think it's really important that we collaborate beyond just the area you're in. So think very hard and listen very much to the background of this, because it's really, really important in terms of the kinds of things we will and won't support through the programme. ISCF challenges have to be very well articulated. As some of you may know, we're going through the Wave 3 preparation now, and for those, they really have to show that the main way of solving it is deployment of research output. It doesn't have to be new technologies, it's really taking new knowledge to evolve the way a sector might work, or to grow a sector from nothing. So this is really one around changing the way construction works. We've got other areas like quantum technologies where we're trying to grow a whole new industry. We have to very clear success criteria, so an endpoint, so that we know within the time of the program whether we've really made a difference or not. And that's why the monitoring of projects and investments we make is going to be upper level from maybe where you're used to. So embrace that. And the real world impact's got to really make a difference to society generally. This is a large amount of money, and quite rightly, taxpayers can say, why are you putting money into this rather into more nurses or teachers? So it's the societal impact aspect is really, really very important, so do keep thinking about that. So the context for transforming construction, these are the challenges we are tackling. This is what's driving the need for the Transforming Construction programme. We have a challenge in that productivity in construction globally is low. It's below the standards of the rest of the economy, really. What that means is, because we take a labour-intensive approach to construction, essentially we're taking a lot of artisanal people and producing artisanal products. Every building is a prototype, really. Construction projects, therefore, tend to be inefficient, late, over budget. But a large part of the economy, by our calculations, is very reliant on the services that is enabled by the built environment. So how can we do better at optimizing the whole life performance of the things that we build? And that includes things like whole life cost as well. So energy performance can often be poor. Buildings, and we've shown from work we've invested in the past, often use 2, 3, 4 times more energy than they were designed for. It's real pesky once we put people in them, isn't it? But the government have big, significant forward commitments towards more housing, towards building greater and greater infrastructure. From here, I can see where HS2 is going to start, for example. And right now, the sector is below strength and below the required productivity to deliver that. The sector knows it has to change. And that's being further compromised by the fact we have an aging workforce in construction and the potential impacts of something like Brexit. So for this challenge, we're bringing together construction, manufacturing, energy and digital sectors to change the way we deliver the buildings the UK needs. And that's really important. This isn't a pot of money with construction sector written on it. I want to see collaboration across all of these sectors. There's a very good reason why we're stood here today in the digital catapult. We want to see the best digital companies coming forward to help take the very most recent technology and the technology areas we're heading towards in the future to apply them to industrializing this sector. We want to see the very best people who are delivering the new energy technologies involved. So please do take the opportunity to be here today to learn about what the digital catapult can offer in terms of connecting into those kinds of people. So you've already heard we've got a KTN guy at the back, and we've got do you want to stand up? We've got our digital colleagues here for the catapult as well. So please do take the chance to look around, because the three things we're going to concentrate on doing is how can we manufacture buildings, how can we use digital technologies to design them better and manage them through the whole life cycle of their operation, and how we can power buildings. How can we integrate energy-positive technologies to make sure that our buildings can use, store, and manage energy. Quickly going to whip you through the thinking behind some of these. I'm aware Jamie's going to come and present later, so I'll let him do it because he's much more articulate at this. But the idea here really is to say, can we use much more modern methods of technology? That implies off-site. It's not just that, it can be some very smart technologies on-site as well. But really what we're trying to do is take a process approach to the way we put our buildings and infrastructure together. We want to deliver them with greater certainty at lower costs. And the thinking behind that, which I'm guessing Jamie's going to cover, is taking a platform approach to this, so defining very standardized component sizes and defining the way they come together, very much like, say, a Lego kit. So you know you have to build these things, and everyone knows how to get. What we can then do is start to mobilize supply chains rather than mobilizing people. That's how manufacturing has driven up productivity in the past. I'm going to skip over this because I don't want to steal your slides too much. So Jamie will go through some of this kind of thinking around taking this kind of platform approach, so do stick around for that. And I really do recommend, following listening to his talk, you go away and download this document that is on the Centre for Digital Build Britain's website, which really lays out the thinking around the platform approach. If you want to understand where we want to get to from a manufacturing approach to buildings, this is a really, really well-written document. What we want to lead towards is a new kind of ecosystem in the way construction works. As I said, we want to mobilize manufacturing supply chains rather than skilled labor. What we want are these components to exist in a digital form as well, that we can design digitally and then kind of press go, and that pulls on those supply chains. Those components come assembled into substructures, brought to site, and assembled into buildings. But as Jamie will say, what we want with this is we still want bespoke solutions, but we want to standardize the processes and how they come together. It's been done in lots of other sectors. It's not been done in construction yet. And we will start by doing this with public buildings within the program. So going back to thinking about how we manage buildings through their entire life cycle, as I said before, this is some calculation work that was done by EY for us in the Digital Build Britain program. And what we can see is getting on for half of GDP is driven by the services that the infrastructure and built environment enable across the UK. So how can we do better at optimizing what buildings and infrastructure do? Because that's where the real value comes. So we can argue quite a lot about how much it's going to cost as a capital build and getting it built early on time. We still care about that. But really, across its lifetime, how can we make sure it performs better and the operational costs are lower? So we want to keep taking forward the UK's leadership position in building information modelling. We want to use digital technologies to better optimise, monitor and design and feed back into the way we design buildings. And elsewhere in the programme, we'll be funding some longer-term science to get some very hard data around how we can connect building performance for users back to the kind of physical inputs of buildings. And then thinking about how we power buildings, we need to take our buildings off-grid. This is historical, seasonal use of energy in the UK. The red line is electricity, and that's where most people seem to get vexed. The blue line's gas. We have to get off the gas grid if we're going to meet some of our future carbon targets. How can we design buildings that work off the gas grid? Most of that energy is being used to heat water and space within buildings. Although electricity use is going up, as we're learning at the moment, London uses more energy to cool itself now than it does to heat itself through the year. And I think we're getting a good example of that today. So some of the work we've funded in the past, like in Swansea at the Specific Centre, this is the active classroom. There's now an active office next door to it. This building's been off-grid for several years now. It generates 1.6 times the energy it uses, and it dumps that excess energy it stores in batteries into its fleet of electric cars, because there's nowhere else to put it. So if you think where all the electric vehicles in the future are going to come from, we have a program within the ISCF around electric vehicles. We also have a program in the ISCF around energy grids and communities. Both of them are going to solve some of the challenges about where that energy goes. But a future definitely is going to come along where we need to be generating more energy within our buildings. And this building's got all sorts of integrated features. So the roof's an integrated solar PV. The walls themselves are some very nice high-tech material that sucks warm air, even in Swansea, and is able to store that heat and use it in heating the building. And some of the other research they're doing there is around interseasonal heat storage. So we really got some of the technologies there. How can we make it much more standard practice to integrate it from the beginning into buildings, and it becomes a no-brainer. So all this is driven by some very joined-up work across government. So the policy context here and the other documents I strongly recommend you read to get some background as to where this challenge is working from is the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme. And this is from the IPA, who are part of Treasury. They look at the long-term investments that the government makes into things like HS2, Crossrail, Thames Tideway, etc., and want to take a whole life cycle approach to doing that. They're working up metrics to look at how we will make those investment decisions. But more importantly, we're starting to work with 5 different government departments who all, between them, procure about £20 billion worth of buildings every year to take a presumption in favour of the kinds of technologies and approaches we want to develop within this programme. So they will be procuring, through the work of the programme, exactly the kinds of solutions we want to support in the future. We've already started some work on this, and maybe Jamie will cover this around working for prisons. So how can we start to standardise the way we build the kind of living blocks within prisons and actually build them in a factory? Or better than that, build them in factories that are built, maced inside a prison itself, and use that to rehabilitate offenders and teach them life skills to go out and work. And maybe I'm stealing your thunder here, Jamie, but the first prisoner to have already gone through that programme has left prison and has a job working in the construction sector doing exactly this. As well as that, MHCLG, that's the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, now have some very large funds for small-scale developers who are working in modern methods of construction. And they want to support the building of new homes this way. So there's lots of joined-up pull for this. In fact, it kind of works as a kind of three-legged milking stool, I suppose. None of these things happen without each other, so the challenge only really works because of the kind of aggregated pull and consistent demand we'll get from government, thanks to the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme. And the construction sector deal, which was announced a couple of weeks ago, and you'll see quite a lot of the heart of it is this programme, supports all the other things we need to do around it, on skills and different changes in contracting, and has the strong support from the Construction Leadership Council and all the big developers to say this is how we want to change. Because we need to change. The sector really has to change now to be able to deliver what it does in the future. And you can see that the strategy from the CLC very much ties up with where we're aiming to do. So when we're thinking about the targets and what we want to achieve within the programme, it's completely connected to this. So these are 2025 construction targets about reducing costs by 1/3, slashing delivery time by 50%, reducing the trade gap for the sector, and reducing carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of the process by 50%. And in doing so, delivering better performing infrastructure and buildings. So the programme itself, working with government, will start with social infrastructure, and we want those ideas to then read out across into all the other areas. And you can see the priorities for the CLC very much line up with what we're talking about in the program here. So digital, manufacturing, and whole life performance. So this is kind of a balance of, this is a kind of visual summary really of the sector deal, what industry is going to be getting out of it, what government's trying to get out of it. So what all that means is these are the objectives for the program with some kind of indicative measurements. This is what you need to be delivering. Ava will come back to this, but scope-wise, unless all our investments will be delivering at least one of these kinds of targets. And we'll be measuring what you're doing within the project to see whether you are on target for delivering this. Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund money comes with strings. The challenge director, as I say, I'm the interim one, I won't be probably by the time your projects are up and running, has the power to come and take your money away if you're not delivering on these targets. What we want to do is keep the money ruthlessly focused on delivering these objectives. So think very carefully about how your project will deliver these and be able to demonstrate within the life of the project that you're able to deliver these. So where is the 170 million going? It's going across these three main areas, and you can see sticking with those challenges around digital design and management, manufacture and powering buildings. To provide the kind of facilities and the kind of coordinated program we need to deliver a lot of this, particularly for the government work, we're setting up two centres, the Core Innovation Hub and the Active Building Centre. Both will be announced in the coming months, and in the future rounds of collaborative R&D funding, we expect we'll be funding a lot of work to work with those centres, particularly for the smaller businesses. The Core Innovation Hub will do a lot of the platform design work that Jamie will talk about, provide the facilities for testing and scale up, the manufacturing expertise, the regulatory expertise you're going to need, and the digital expertise. The Active Building Centre is there to help bring down the cost of those integrated technology components to a point when it becomes a no-brainer to incorporate them and demonstrate these on scale with demonstrators to show they really do work. And the collaborative R&D program along the bottom, this is the first announcement within that, this collaborative R&D call. There are other things, but they're all aimed at these kinds of outcomes here. So as well as this collaborative R&D call we already have open at the moment, and this is for academic research, is a Network Plus call that's run by our colleagues at ESRC, and again there's a quick tiny URL link if you want to go along and look at that. So that's already open. We want it up and running by November. I should say with all of the things that we do here, timelines are very tight, and it might look like we're laying out the track as we go and we're making it up and putting all the processes in place as we go along. There's a reason for that. It's because we are. The nature in which the money is arriving to us and we're having to disperse it is probably faster than we would like. So we're all in it together, so let's work together to move as fast as we can. And getting this Network Plus call up and running before the end of the year is going to be a challenge. What this will do is to coordinate all kinds of existing academic research that sits outside of the two centres we're going to fund to make sure it's bringing in the best of the kind of knowledge we might need, everything from social science through to manufacturing research, so that we really are bringing all the best of existing knowledge that's been supported and funded by public money already to be able to deliver the program. There will be some scope within that to do the odd little bit of high-risk research to kind of fill gaps and also to make sure that we can maybe second real experts to the places where we need them. But it's really making sure that all of that knowledge is coordinated and available. As well as that, in the next week or two, we'll be opening a research call. That will be managed by our colleagues at EPSRC, although the breadth and scope of it is way beyond just EPSRC. We want to fund projects right across the spectrum of UK research and innovation areas. These will be longer-term projects to deliver the kinds of knowledge that we'll be needing within the time frame of the program to fill some of the gaps. So an example, something I was part of last week, there's some great research going on around neuroscience, so understanding the cognitive behavior in the brain of a user in a building or in a larger urban environment and how we can relate that back to physical factors. So how can we optimize buildings for the individual? We'd love to see schools being built in the schools program where measurably pupils perform better because of their physical environment. And it's more than just some design rules or some hard science behind it. So that's one example, but we can cover everything from manufacturing to new business models, all sorts of different things that are going to be needed to make this program a success. What we won't be doing is funding anything that's already been supported or is being supported elsewhere in the program. So if you are going to make any applications of this and it's academic-led, please do come and talk to us first. Or talk to those people who are delivering other parts of the program, and we can help you do that. Either talk to us or the KTN. And there'll be future calls. So if you're not successful in this one, there's other opportunities coming. There's still going to be another, say 35 million that we'll be putting out as calls by the end of next summer. So this time next year, there'll certainly be other calls being available, and we'll be telling you about them well in advance and what they're going to do. And they really are to support some of the bigger development projects. So keep thinking ahead as to what else is going to be needed to be successful in the things you're doing. And they will be CR&D calls, they will be business-led, just like this one. That's enough from me. So Ewa's going to come and tell you a bit more about the scope of the competition itself.
Is this on now? Yeah, it is. I'll do my best to obstruct your view, and we've put up some stuff in here because this is difficult. You know, this is a view which I'm not quite sure I can compete with. However, I've got money, so presumably I can. Right, I'll tell you a little bit about the objectives. Mike has mentioned a lot of the background already, so I'll try not to repeat that. I can't really talk as excitingly about it as he does. And then I'll tell you bits and pieces around sort of dates and some of the conditions for applying before I pass on to Helen and Jonathan, who will tell you the breadth of sort of what to do and what not to do in particular. Right, so in terms of the scope itself, oh, that's interesting. Not quite sure what happened with that cross. But in terms of sort of transforming construction and why we're doing it in the first place, obviously Mike has mentioned already the government commitment to build more, to be building high quality and more affordable housing, schools, and other infrastructure investments. Large parts of the economy rely on the services that buildings enable, so it has got a knock-on effect on how we function and how we work in those places. And our ability to deliver is somehow diminished by aging workforce and things such as, for example, Brexit. I don't know what's going on there. I've got some really beautiful pictures. So all you can see is a cross, so clearly something has gone quite wrong. But just believe me, there are some pictures of very traditional construction sites, and the point I was trying to make on this particular slide was the fact, what do we see when we pass a construction site, besides men in high-vis jackets? We obviously see a very manual labor-intense processes. So we see lots of, pouring of concrete. We see, people laying bricks. We see painting. We hear lots of noises. It's a very labor-intense model of constructing, and that's what we're trying to get away from in this particular competition. We see lots of projects running over budgets, lots of time schedules being stretched to impossible timelines simply because of the delays in construction, of the delays caused by weather, for example, amongst other factors. So there's quite a lot of factors that can influence the productivity, but also the quality of what's being produced. Again, you have to trust me on the fact that there were some really nice pictures here. Sadly, not quite sure what happened again. There must be a better way. One of the criticisms which we hear quite a lot in terms of the construction sector and the fact that most buildings are one-off projects is the fact that, standardizing some of the buildings might somehow diminish the creativity of, for example, architects, or the ability to be able to make those buildings much more sort of user-friendly. So imagine a process where you've got very high technically and digitally complex elements and components which can be manufactured off-site and put together on the site. This is how the International Space Station was built, and I don't think you can get any more sort of customized than that. So it is possible in other sectors, and that's what we're trying to do with this particular competition. We're trying to learn from other sectors, in particular manufacturing, in particular the use of digital, in particular looking at aspects such as energy, incorporated into the processes, to learn from others and to not reinvent the wheels, but just optimize and make much more efficient some of those processes. There's a picture. Yeah, that's a proof. I had some. Fantastic. So this slide has been mentioned already. I won't repeat all of that, obviously, but we've got a program which looks at sort of much more coherent approach of what we can do. So we've got the different components within the hub and the ABC Center, and then we've got the R&D program, which will hopefully bind it all together. So we're looking at manufacturing buildings, we're looking at design and management, and also the energy performance of the buildings, but also the whole process and the sort of the embedded energy consumption in that. So these are the three elements of the life cycle of buildings that we're looking at in this program. Those objectives, and this is not the first time I'm mentioning the objectives, they will be mentioned later on because I'm trying to kind of instill the spirit of the program into you. So those objectives are really the mantra of the program. You will have to correspond to at least one of them if you want to be within the scope of the program. And that's quite important for us because most of those objectives, -1, I think, have got targets attached to them, and those targets, again, linked to the construction sector deal. So it's quite important for us to be able to see within your projects how you correspond to those objectives, but also how your project will contribute to achieving those targets. With that, we've mentioned, I won't repeat. In terms of the key facts and dates, we've got obviously the launch, which is today, an official launch. So that's brilliant, and I think we've got some promotional campaign being launched today as well, just to sort of reinforce the message and beat it into those who want to apply. It will close on my birthday. So birthday cards will be well received. 19th of September at 12 noon. So not in the afternoon, 12 at noon. So guess what I'll be doing in the evening. Competition budget is up to £12.5 million. It's not an amount of money that will completely sort of change the sector from scratch. It's not a major amount of money, but it's a good amount of money to instill that change and start the process of transforming the construction industry. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to bring on ideas that will, within the length of the project, within the duration of the program, instill change. Projects must start by December 2018. Now, this is one of the absolute musts of the program. And, you know, Mike has mentioned the fact that we're working against some pretty tight deadlines, and the competitions team, Jonathan and Helen, have been very accommodating of that. We do have very tight time scales, but then again, that could be, of course, an advantage as well, because if you've got projects that fit into the program and you write them up well and you get the money, you will be ready to start very soon. So that's a positive as well. All projects must be led by UK for-profit business, which is really a no-brainer, in particular in our cases. Right, in terms of the competition aims, as I've mentioned already, so we're looking at those three elements of the program, or the three construction life cycle stages. So obviously designing, managing buildings through digitally enabled performance manager. And the emphasis here is the digital element of things. So really sort of going outside of the traditional thinking and incorporating digital solutions that perhaps can be borrowed from other sectors in particular. Constructing quality buildings through off-site manufacturing approach. We do have evidence that off-site actually does produce much more effective way of constructing buildings. So this is what we want to enhance in here. And obviously powering buildings with effective energy components and improving build quality. In terms of the outputs, and again, there was a picture to accompany that. We are looking to fund collaborative projects that develop technologies, processes, and business models that can pave the way to achieve those three elements. So new build assets, 50% faster and 33% cheaper. Now, those targets correspond to the CLC targets, as you will see. Half the lifetime carbon emissions, so sort of looking at whole lifetime approach in terms of carbon consumption, carbon emissions, and improve whole life performance. In terms of the different themes, we expect that the projects will incorporate or will involve one or more of those following. So application or adoption of innovative digital and manufacturing technologies. So, you either sort of develop something fairly new or you just adapt it from other sectors and learn on the basis of that. Development of cohesive, collaborative business models. So very much looking at the business model approach in terms of how to instigate the change. And then supply chain integration. So developing supply chains that can correspond to both demand and supply in terms of providing economies of scale. We welcome innovative and ambitious partnerships, which will involve, as has been mentioned already, a number of different disciplines, because we're quite aware of the fact that change cannot just come within one particular sector. It has to be a combination of a number of them. So digital, Internet of Things, which obviously is part of digital, energy, manufacturing, project management, those are the disciplines that we would typically expect in projects to see. The must-haves are mostly related to, first of all, the fact that you need to correspond to the objectives of the program. Without that, you don't have a project. So it is really sort of a new way of thinking in terms of not, how do I make my project fit into the objective, but how do I actually correspond to that objective? How do I contribute to the overall program and those objectives? That's very important to us. So one or more of the following objectives, you've got 6 of them. Each one of them has got an attached target to it. So just think about how you can convince those who will be evaluating your proposal that you do indeed correspond to the objective and that you will be able to contribute to achieving the targets. All projects must be collaborative. That's quite an important aspect for us. So, we do, as I've mentioned already, we do realize that change cannot just come within one particular organization. It has to be a collaboration and it has to be a joined-up approach. That's why we won't accept single company submissions. It has to be collaborative projects. We will prioritize projects which demonstrate cross-sector collaboration. So that cross-sector collaboration of digital, of energy, of manufacturing, of construction project management, of those different disciplines that gives you something new in terms of the approach to changing the sector or the way the sector works. We will prioritize also projects which develop or test scalable solutions. So this is quite important because within the 4 years of the program, we actually want projects that will deliver the change, not just talk about the change or describe the change in the report. So we want projects which will actually produce something that can be tested and validated in a real setting. That's very important to us in terms of that market access and marketability. Proposals I've mentioned already must be led by UK-based for-profit business, and that should in turn again help with the market sort of commercial mindset of the project as well. We encourage you very strongly to involve users or testbed providers because that again validates the market access as well in terms of the project or the route to market. What we won't fund. Projects that don't meet the aims of the competition. So if there's no clear match, I'm sorry, you're going to have to look somewhere else. Do not respond to the objectives or targets of the challenge. That's quite important. The target element as well is very important because we as a program will be measured on those targets and you as a project will be measured on those targets as well. And we won't fund projects that look at retrofit. In terms of the project types, and I'm kind of stealing the wind from Helen and from Jonathan here, because I'm sure they will be talking about it as well, probably much more excitingly. So projects, the shorter ones, so projects between 6 months and 12 months, may have total project costs, so not the grant, total project costs between £25,000 and £500,000. And they may include feasibility studies, industrial research, or a combination of both, whatever fits into what you think you want to do and corresponds to the objectives. If your project total cost or duration falls outside of that, you need to contact us prior to submitting to discuss that, please. Then we've got longer projects, so projects between 12 and 24 months, which again then have higher budgets, but quite a wide spread between £250,000 and £1 million. So that's quite a broad spread to enable you to do the things that you think will really transform the sector. So those may include industrial research, experimental development, or again, a combination of both. And again, if you're somewhere outside of those frames in terms of either timing or the budgets, please contact us and talk to us prior to submitting. Again, stealing the wind from the competitions team. They will mention it, but I stole your slides first, and I'm speaking first. So in terms of types of organizations, at least 70% of total eligible costs of the project must be incurred by businesses, because for us, that is one of the good measures of how commercially minded the project is and how business-driven it is. Maximum level of the project costs to be shared between research organizations is 30%. So if you've got more than one research organization or academic organization in the consortium, 30% is for the total of them. Collaboration, that's quite important for us. As I've mentioned, it's one of the absolute requirements of the project. Collaboration is not just someone putting in and contributing with money and someone else not. Collaboration is sharing the risk, and that's quite important to emphasize that at least 2 organizations claiming the grant, which in turn is also equal to obviously contributing in terms of match funding. And for-profit business must lead the collaboration, which could involve then businesses and research base. We need evidence of effective collaboration, like with any project you have done in the past, and I'm sure most of you are well used to this. We need to see evidence that this is a genuine collaboration, not just made up for the reason of the application. In terms of sort of multiple applications or organizations taking part, any one business may lead on one application and collaborate in further 2. If you're not leading, then you could be a collaborator of up to 3. But just bear in mind that this is obviously sort of, you need to have the means to actually be able to work on those projects. RTO or academic institution cannot lead an application, but can be collaborator in any number. And with that, thank you very much. That's the contact details to our customer support service, which is open pretty much all day, every day. A lot of the scope inquiries will find its way probably to me, to be honest. So the best way is to always contact them and wait to hear back from them. They're very efficient and quick. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, so I'm probably just going to run through everything that Eva's just said, so bear with me. So my name's Jonathan Dorian. I'm the portfolio manager for this competition. I'm joined by Helen, and she'll run through the later part of this presentation. So we will run through the eligibility criteria, the application process, the application finances, submitting your application, the assessment process, and project setup for successful applicants. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. So on screen, you can see the eligibility criteria. So to lead, you must be a UK-based business, and you can also be a collaborator as a UK-based business, and an academic organisation, charity, public sector organisation, or research and technology organisation. You must carry out the work of your project in the UK, and intend to exploit the results of the project in the UK. And you must work in collaboration with businesses, research organisations, public sector organisations, and third sector organisations. So the projects must be structured in these two ways. So projects lasting between 6 and 12 months must have a total project cost of between 25,000 and 500,000. Projects that last between 12 and 24 months must have a total project cost of between 250,000 and 1 million. So on the screen, you'll be able to see the type of organisations that we fund through Innovate UK. For this competition, you must be a business to lead, but on this, research organisations and public sector organisations can collaborate on this competition as well, and you must be based in the UK. So a business can claim 70% of the total eligible project costs, and research organisations must share the 30% of the project eligible costs. So collaboration again. So at least 2 organisations must be claiming grant. Businesses must lead the collaboration, and there must be evidence of effective collaboration, as Eva said. So any one business may lead on 1 application and collaborate in a further 2 applications. If a business is not leading an application, they can be a collaborator in up to 3 applications. An RTO or academic institution cannot lead on the application, but can be a collaborator in any number of applications. If an application is unsuccessful, you can use the feedback received to reapply for the same project into a further round of this competition or another competition. A project proposal can only be submitted twice. If you have an outstanding final claim and independent accounting report with Innovate UK, you will not be eligible to apply for grant funding in this competition as a lead or as a partner organisation. If you've applied to a previous competition as a lead or a sole company and were awarded funding by Innovate UK but did not make substantial effort to exploit the award, we will award no more funding to you. So on screen is the key dates for this competition. So it opens today, the briefing event today. Submission deadline is on the 19th of September at 12 noon, and this is a hard deadline, so any application that is made past that time will not be accepted, so 12:01, you're out. Applicants will be informed on the 26th of October. And now we'll run through how you apply. And this competition is being run through IFS. So IFS is our online digital platform through which applications can be made. And this screen details where in the world most of our applications come from. So as you would expect, the majority of our applications come from the UK, and that small dark blue bit. But we also accept applications from around the world. So the next highest is the US, we're followed by China and Colombia and Germany. And that is the main point of IFS. It is a collaborative process. It allows people to join and submit applications through that. And it's very easy, you think. So when you go to our website, Innovate UK, you'll be able to search for the funded competitions. We have several live at the minute. So if you search for construction, this is the page that you'll see, and the page will detail the scope of the competition, the eligibility criteria, and it'll have guidance on how to apply. So if you've applied for Innovate UK grant funding before and you've viewed IFS, you will be able to just sign in and start your application. However, if you're a new user, you will have to sign in and create an account, and you can do that easily through IFS. And if you can use Companies House to automatically input your details. However, if academic institutions are applying and partnering on this application, we tend to urge you to use to manually input your data, because you will not then be listed as an academic rather than a business. So IFS is a collaborative process, and you are allowed to assign different parts of the application to different collaborators. So you can have participants from within your organization, so you can assign parts of the application to them by inputting the email address, and there'll be an invite to collaborate will be sent to them. But you can also invite outside collaborators, so partner organizations. They can be invited this way as well. So when you're answering a question, this is what you'll see. It will show you the word count, and you'll be able to format your answer. And each section actually includes the guidance for each question as well. And also, there's you should spell check. So the application form is split into 3 sections. So an overview of the project details. So this section is not marked, but is used to give an indicative sign to assessors of the project. And it also includes a public description. Then you have the application questions. Now, all of these application questions are marked and scored by the assessors. And then you have the finance section. This finance section is not marked, but is also, again, to use for context for the assessors when they're looking through your questions. So I'll run through each section now. So the first section, project details. So you will need to fill in application details, which is a title. You need to fill in the timescale of your project, the research category, and select an innovation area. Then you will be asked to fill in a project summary, which is a short summary of the project and set out the objectives of what you intend to achieve. And then a public description. So Innovate UK is a publicly funded organisation, so we are required to publish everything that we fund online. So this is a really important thing. If you Google transparency data, you can look of all the Innovate UK funded projects post this, and the public, along with their public description. So when you fill in this, you need to be aware of confidentiality and what you really want to see published and see out there. And then you will be required to fill in the scope. So how does your project align with the scope as Eva described? So then I'll now move on to the application questions. So for this competition, there are 10 questions, as you can see on the screen. And 4 of them you can attach appendices to. So the first question, what is the business need, technological challenge, or market opportunity driving your innovation? So you will need to describe what is the main motivation, what is the nearest current state of art, what have you considered those near market or in development? Describe any work you have already done to address this need, and identify any wider economic, social, environmental, cultural, and/or political challenges. So, and the next question is, what approach will you take, and where will you focus the innovation be? So, how will you address the need, challenge, or opportunity identified? Explain how will it improve on the nearest current state of art identified? Where will the focus of innovation be in the project, and do you have freedom to operate? Explain how this project fits with your current project, service lines, or offerings. Describe the nature of the outputs you expect from the project, and how these will take you closer to addressing the need, challenge, or opportunity identified. And on screen, you'll be able to see that you'll be able to submit an appendices to this question. So this is a PDF document, max 1 MB in size, so 2 sides of A4. So question 3 is with regards to team and resources. So who is in the project team and what are their roles? So describe the roles, skills, and relevant experience of all the members of the project team. State the resources, equipment, and facilities required for the project and how you will access them. Provide details of any key external parties, including subcontractors. Describe the current relationship between the project partners and how these will change as a result of the project. Are there any gaps in the team that will need to be filled? And also, you'll be able to submit appendices for this question as well. So again, PDF, max 1 MB, 4 sides of A4 page. So the 4th question, what does the market you are targeting look like? What is the market that you'll be targeting in the project and any other potential markets? You should consider the size of the addressable market, the structure and dynamics of the market, the main supply and value chains and the business models in operation, and the current UK position in addressing this market. For highly innovative projects where the market may be unexplored, explain what the route to market could or might be, what is the size might be, and how will the project how the project will seek to explore the market potential. So the fifth question, how do you propose to grow your business and increase your productivity into the long-term result of the project? So what is your current position in the market and your route to market? Who are your target customers and or end users? What is the value proposition to them? Tell us how you will profit from the innovation and how it will impact your productivity and growth. Describe how you protect and exploit the outputs of your project. Outline your strategy for addressing the other markets identified during or after the project. For any other research organisation activity in the project, outline your plans to disseminate the project research outputs over a reasonable timescale. So question 6, what impact might this project have outside the project team? What are the economic benefits from the project to those outside the project? Highlight the expected social and environmental impacts, either positive or negative, and explain any expected regional impacts of the project. So question 7 is with regards to project management. So how will you manage the project effectively? So you need to outline the main work packages of the project, indicating for each the relevant research category, the lead partner assigned, and the total cost of each package. Describe your approach to project management and the management reporting lines. Outline your project plan in sufficient detail to identify any links or dependencies between your work packages and milestones. And for this question as well, you may upload another appendices in PDF format, and some people tend to upload a project plan or a Gantt chart. So question 8, what are the main risks for this project? Identify the key risks and uncertainties of this project, including the technical, commercial, managerial, and environmental risks. Explain how these risks will be mitigated. List any project inputs on the critical path to completion. Are the outputs likely to be subject to regulatory requirements, certification, and any ethical issues? If so, and how will you manage these? And again, you're allowed to upload an appendices in the form of a risk register in PDF format. So question 9 is describe the impact that an injection of public funding would have on this project. Tell us if this project could go ahead without public funding. If so, what other difference would the public funding make? Describe the likely impact of the project on the business of the partners involved. Why are you unable to wholly fund the project from your own resources or other forms of private sector funding? Explain how this project would change the nature of the partner's R&D activity. The last question is, how much will the project cost and how does it represent value for money for the team and the taxpayer? So here you need to justify the total project costs and the grant being requested in line with the project goals. How will the partners finance their contribution to the project? Explain how this project represents value for money for you and the taxpayer. Justify the balance of costs and grants across the project partners, and describe any subcontractor costs and why they are critical to the project. And I will now hand over to Helen, who will describe the application finances.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk you through now what you can and can't claim for and how you input your project costs into the IFS system. So each partner within your consortium will need to go in and put in their costs for the part of the project, for the project work that they're doing specifically. So this is what the screen will look like. So there's 3 sections to fill in: your project costs, your organisation, and your funding. So under your project costs, there's 7 different categories that you'll need to go through. And each one will ask you whether you've got any costs being incurred in that category. You select yes or no. If it's a yes, then you need to give us some more detail about what your costs will be. Now, there is guidance online around each of these. I'll talk through them as well now briefly. But if you haven't applied to us before, you'll probably find it really useful to read through the document about filling in these categories, which gives you a bit more detail about what you can and can't claim for under each category in here. So the first section is labour. So we need you to tell us about all of the staff who will be working directly on the project. You would need to be paying them through PAYE to be able to evidence to claim against. And you can include national insurance, pension, and non-discretionary costs. You can't claim for dividends, bonuses, or any time that they're not working on the project. So in this tab, you'll need to list out what their role is on the project, the cost of that employee, how many days they'll be spending on the project, and that will then calculate your total costs. So you don't need to list each individual person. If there's multiple people doing the same role, you can include all of their costs under that category. The next section is overheads. So there's different ways of calculating your overheads if you will be incurring any overheads on your project. The first way is to select 20% of your labour costs. So that's the most straightforward way of calculating your overheads, especially if you want to get up and running quite quickly. Or you can select the Calculate Overheads option, which requires you to then put in some more detail around what your overheads are so that our project finance team can go through those and check them all. So if you choose to do that, there is some more guidance online as well around this. But there's two different types of overheads. So there's indirect administration overheads. So these are any overheads relating to the people who are supporting the project. So for example, HR, finance, administrative staff who are spending a proportion of their time supporting that project, but they're not working on it directly. So you can claim for those people's time and any overheads relating to those members of staff. And then direct overheads are the overheads that relate specifically to the people who are working on the project directly. So any office utilities, IT infrastructure, etc., related to those staff, you can claim for under direct overheads. You'll need to show with all overheads that these are being incurred as a result of the project on top of what you would have incurred from the day-to-day running of your business. Material costs is the next one. So you can claim for any materials that you need to purchase to use in the project. So you need to list out the item, what the quantity is and what the cost per item is, and that will then calculate your materials. The next section is capital equipment. So if you're going to be purchasing any equipment to use in your project, or you're sharing equipment with the day-to-day running of your business, it's something you already own, you can claim for the depreciation of that piece of equipment. So you need to tell us what the item is, whether it's new or existing, the period that you plan to depreciate it over, the value at the start and the value at the end, and then you can claim for that difference. The next section is subcontract costs. So you will need to tell us if you plan to work with any subcontractors. Now, assessors don't see this level of detail, they'll see the high-level finances. So do remember, when you're telling us about subcontractors and what they're doing in your project, make sure that's really clear in the application form as well as in this part of the form. So this part is really for Innovate when we go through and check all of your costs if you're successful. So you need to tell us who the subcontractor is that you plan to work with, what country the work will be carried out in, and a brief description of the role of that subcontractor and what work they'll be doing. Now, if they are outside of the UK, please make sure you do justify this as to why you need to go outside of the UK to access those skills and those resources. Obviously, as Innovate UK, we want to fund the UK supply chain as much as we can, but we appreciate there are instances when you do need to go overseas to access certain skills. So just make sure that's really well justified in your application. Travel and subsistence is the next one, so you can claim for any travel and subsistence costs directly relating to the project. So, for example, travelling to meetings to meet with your project partners, you can include those costs in here. Travel needs to be at economy level. So it has to be directly related to the project. So no sort of sales and marketing things, but meeting with your partners would be fine. And then finally, other costs is for anything else, obviously, that you couldn't fit into those previous categories where you're going to be incurring cost on your project. So, for example, it might be things like patent filing for SMEs. You can claim up to $7,500. Training, licensing software, that sort of thing. Again, there's more guidance online about the typical costs that we expect to see in this category. And if you're not sure as you do go through and fill in these costs about what might or might not be eligible or what category you should put something into, please do get in touch with our customer support desk and they'll be able to help you with that. So once you've filled them all in, you'll see a screen like this which shows your different categories. You need to confirm that you've read the cost guidance and you're happy that all of the costs you've submitted are eligible. And then you need to mark it as complete. The next section is around your organisation. So this is really important because this is going to affect how much funding you can claim in this competition. So you'll need to tell us what your organisation size is, and there's a link there to the EU definition of whether you're a small, micro, medium or large, and that's based on your turnover and the number of employees. So that's really important in terms of the grant you can receive. And then we also ask you for some details around your finances, which is just used for Innovate UK internally. If you're a new company and you don't have a turnover yet, then you can just put 0 in that box. And then you come to your funding section. So the level of funding awarded is awarded to each participant in your project. So there's no overall grant limit on the project, but there's a limit on how much each individual partner can claim depending on what type of organisation they are. So funding is awarded by participant. And the system will tell you the maximum grant that you can claim depending on what type of organisation you are and the research category that your project falls under. So if you are predominantly carrying out a feasibility study or industrial research, if you're a business, you can claim 70% if you're a small or micro organisation, 60% if you're a medium, and 50% if you're a large. And you would then need to match fund the remainder of those costs. If your project is experimental development, which is that bit closer to market, as you can see, the amount of grant you can claim is a bit lower. If you're a research organisation, so universities I'll talk about in a moment will need to apply through the GES system. So universities can claim 80% of their full economic costs. Other research organisations can claim 100% of their project costs. In order to claim that full amount, all research organisations must be non-profit distributing, and they must explain in the application how they will disseminate the work that they've done in the project. So Jonathan mentioned that in one of the questions. We ask you to explain how you'll be disseminating the work that you specifically have done on the project. And then the third category is public sector organisations or charities. They can also claim 100% of their costs. They must be carrying out research activity, and again, they need to disseminate the results of the work they've done. And if you are a public sector organisation, just make sure that none of the costs you're claiming for are already being funded by public money, as those would not be eligible. So this is just an example of what a consortium might look like with different funding levels in it. So you can see you've got 2 businesses in there, so 2 medium businesses who are both claiming 60% of their costs, and then they're match funding the rest. A large business which is having to claim 50% of their costs and putting 50% in themselves. And then you have a university and a catapult, and together the university and the catapult's costs come to 30% of the total project costs. So you need to make sure that you're within those limits. I'm aware there are a lot of percentages that I'm throwing at you right now. So the university is claiming 80% of their full economic costs, and the catapult is claiming 100% of their costs. Hopefully this makes sense. So once you've put in your costs, so you're in your funding section, it will tell you the amount of funding you can claim. And you need to manually enter into the box how much grant funding you want to claim. Obviously, in most cases, you'll probably be claiming the maximum, but in some cases, you may wish to claim less than the maximum, which is why this field is editable. So do make sure you fill that field in. Don't accidentally leave it blank and say, tell us you're not claiming any grant, which does happen sometimes and can cause quite a lot of problems down the line. You'll also need to tell us if you're receiving any other public funding. We'll talk about that in a moment. And each applicant will need to accept the terms and conditions on this screen. So read the terms and conditions of what you're signing up to and then confirm that you accept them. The lead applicant will not be able to submit the project unless all participants have signed up to those T's and C's. We've had IFS for a little while now, so a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but in the past, we used to have a conditional offer letter once you were successful, which had these terms and conditions in it. And because you now accept them at the point of application, it speeds things up down the line. So if you are successful, it means you can get your project up and running a lot quicker because you've already accepted those T's and C's. Now we ask you to tell us about any other public sector funding. That's any other funding which is specific to this project. So if you've had public sector funding for projects leading up to this or related projects, don't put that in, only if it's related to this specific project. And that's really important because you can only ever claim the maximum amount of public funding. So you can only claim 70%, for example, if you're an SME, whether that comes from us or from other sources as well. So if you fill in this box and tell us about other public funding for this project, that will automatically come off the amount of grant you can receive from Innovate UK. So you'll be able to see a finances overview once all participants have put their costs in. And this will just remind you what the rules are for the competition, so do just double check that you are within the eligibility rules so that your project costs are within the limits. Remember that it's total project costs that we're looking for, not total grant costs. If your total project costs are outside of the limits set for the competition, you won't be eligible for it. So do make sure that your costs are correct. It will also tell you if your research participation is over the permitted amount, and it won't let you submit in that case. However, the system would let you submit if your total project costs are outside of the limits. So please do make sure that they are correct. If you have any partners in your consortium who are not claiming grant, you still need to invite them in to join the application so that they're listed in there. They'll need to select not requesting funding, and then they'll need to go through and put in what their project costs are so we know what the value of their contribution is to the project. And obviously tell us about what they're doing in the project and how you'll be working with them as well. They won't be named in the grant offer letter if you are successful. So for academic partners, any academics in your consortium will need to apply through the GES system. So this is the system which I'm sure any academics in the room are very familiar with, which the Research Council use to collect the academic costs on projects that they fund. And we follow all of the Research Council guidelines around funding academic partners. So the university will need to go in and fill in the GES form to be able to add that into IFS. So when their screen in IFS will look like this, there's a bit less for them to fill in. So they'll go into your project costs, and basically it's a mirror of the GES form. So you'll just need to transfer over the detail from the GES form into IFS and make sure the figures match on both forms, and then you need to upload the GES form to the IFS system. So currently these are two entirely separate systems. They don't talk to each other. So make sure that you've allowed plenty of time to submit your GES form and have that approved and have a with council status before the Innovate UK deadline, so that can be uploaded with your application. As I said before, the university can claim 80% of their full economic costs. So the GES form will calculate 100% of your costs, and then it will tell you what the 80% is. And it's just that 80% that you can put into your Innovate UK application. So that 20% shouldn't appear anywhere as a contribution or as grant within the application. As well as the financial information, they'll also need to fill out the justification of resources and pathways to impact. We don't own the GES system. It's owned by the Research Council element of UK Research and Innovation. So if you do need any help with filling in the GES form, please contact the GES help desk directly, and they should be able to help you. So when you are ready to submit your application, you'll be able to see a high-level summary, which looks like this. Of all the partners. So you can't see the detail behind this, so everything that you put in about your own organisation and those finances, that is confidential to you. You'll just be able to see the top level figures. This is also what the assessors will see. So double check all of that's correct. IFS will make sure that all partners have marked their finances as complete. And it will also check the research participation is within that 30% limit of your total project costs. And it won't let you submit if that's wrong. You'll need to go through and mark all questions as complete before you can submit. So you can do that as you go along. If you mark something as complete, you can still go back and change it. It doesn't sort of fix it. You can go back and edit it. But you do need to make sure you've hit that green complete button on every question before you can submit. So please don't leave it until 2 minutes to 12 to go through and complete all of your questions. As we always see some applications where people have managed to do 9 out of 10 and they haven't quite done the last one and they've missed the deadline. So just make sure you give yourself plenty of time, double check you've put the right things in the right boxes, especially if you're copying and pasting something from a Word document into the system. Again, we sometimes see people have copied question 5 over into question 6 and all sorts of things. So just give yourself plenty of time to make sure you're happy with everything, because the deadline at midday is an absolute deadline. Unfortunately, if you miss the deadline, we can't help you. So when you're ready to submit your application, you just click, yes, I want to submit my application. It will say, do you really want to submit your application? Yes, I do. But once you've hit the final button, you cannot go back in and make any changes. And we can't make changes for you either. So as I said, make sure you're absolutely happy with it before you hit that final submission button. Now this graph shows by hour leading up to the midday deadline of when people submit their applications on a large competition we ran earlier this year. So I know we keep going on about the midday deadline and give yourself plenty of time, but as you can see, most people do leave it till the last minute. Consequently, our customer support desk gets very busy with lots of queries. There's always some people that miss the deadline because they're doing it in a rush at the last minute and they don't quite manage to hit submit in time. So just make sure you give yourself plenty of time. And if you've got any technical issues, we can help you sort them out in plenty of time before the deadline. Once you've submitted your application, it will tell you you've submitted it. It will give you an overview of what happens next. The lead applicant will receive an email confirming that it's been submitted. And you can go back into your dashboard at any time if you want to go in and have a look at your application again, download it as a PDF. And also, if you are successful, this is where you'll come to then set up your project. So in terms of what happens once you've submitted your application, all applications will be assessed by up to 5 assessors. And they will be various experts in this particular area, which will have been selected by Ewa and Mike and their team as the right people to look at these applications. And they'll be looking at your applications to make sure they put the people with the most relevant range of expertise on each one. In terms of what the assessors are looking for, so they're looking for clear and concise answers that answer the questions which are in the guidance. Do make sure you really read the applicant guidance and think about what we're asking you in each question. The assessor guidance basically mirrors that applicant guidance that you've got. We're not asking them to look for anything that we're not telling you to put in there. And we often hear assessors say, it's a really interesting idea, really innovative, but they just haven't answered the question, so I can't give them the marks. And it's very frustrating. Obviously, you've put a lot of time into your application as well, so make sure you really answer the questions so that they can give you the best possible mark. So the right amount of information, so not too much detail in there, as I said, not sort of irrelevant detail, even if it's really interesting, if it's not relevant to the question, it's not going to get you very far. But don't leave big gaps in there so that the assessors are having to sort of guess and make assumptions about what it is you're doing. Make sure that any claims you put in there are quantified and that you justify everything you're doing. They're really looking for a proposal that presents a really good opportunity for growth for your business. And it's a level of innovation that needs a bit of public sector help to get it off the ground and get you closer to market, and that you've got the right people involved, you've got the right approach to the project to really hopefully make a success of your idea. Whether you're successful or not, you will receive assessor feedback from your project, and you'll be able to log into the IFS system after you've been notified of your application, whether you've been successful, and you'll be able to see that feedback against each question. So hopefully, even if you're not successful, hopefully that will still be helpful for you when you come to apply into a future competition, perhaps. Now, if you are successful, just a couple things to be aware of when you come to set up your project. So there's 7 steps to complete. All your partners will need to go in there and put in finance contact details into the IFS system. And as the lead, you may need to give people a bit of a nudge to go in and do their bits. So there's a few things you need to give us. The lead will also need to give us a collaboration agreement and an exploitation plan. At the same time, our finance team will be going through and checking your costs to make sure that they are all eligible costs. They may come back to you with the specific partners with any questions they've got around your costs and query anything that they need to query with you. Projects must start by the date mentioned in the brief. Please be aware that project change requests can't be submitted before the project starts, so you can't sort of start changing partners in and out or sort of moving money around before the project has started. And as we said, all projects must start by December this year, so be ready to go. As I mentioned, you will need to submit a collaboration agreement. We do find this is something that can really hold projects up from starting, so we do advise you to start thinking about this as early as possible with your partners so that you've got that in place and ready to go if you are successful. And now we don't need to be involved in that anyway, but we just need to see that you've got one and it's been signed by all partners and everybody's happy with it. If you are successful, just be aware that grants are claimable quarterly in arrears. So for that first quarter, you'll need to have the cash to be able to put those costs forward, and then you'll be able to claim back the percentage of them. You can only claim for costs that have been incurred and paid between the project's start and end dates. So if you start your project early before the agreed start date, you won't be able to claim for those costs. You'll be assigned a monitoring officer, and they'll be your main point of contact with Innovate UK throughout the life of the project. And they'll monitor your project against your plans that you've submitted and against your spend profile that you've submitted, and they will sign off on your claims. So that brings me to the end. Just a reminder of our contact details. As Ewa said, the customer support desk are really good. They're around to help if you've got any questions Monday to Friday on your application or on the system or anything, and they can help with that. And if they can't, they'll pass your query on to my team or to Ewa. So I think now we've got questions for either for me around the process or for these guys around the competition scope or the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund or anything you want to ask us.
Andrew, if we could have the microphone for Ewa and between Ewa and microphone would be kind of to sit together. Great, and then Ray's roaming around to anyone who's got some questions. So if we start in the room first, is that right, Jenny? Yeah, this chap. Okay. Put his hand down already. Okay, there he is.
Thanks. Can I just clarify the scope of this particular competition? You mentioned infrastructure and construction and improving productivity and performance of that. But in the slides, it's all about buildings. Can you just clarify if highways and rail infrastructure and improving performance, productivity, whole life cost of construction of highways and maintenance of highways is covered?
So wider infrastructure is where we want to go to in the longer run. Overall with the programme, because it's 170 million, sounds like a lot of money in some ways, but it's not in others. So infrastructure's in scope, but we'd like to see the kinds of processes you want to apply to that to be equally applicable to buildings. So the programme itself is going to concentrate and start on buildings and read across into infrastructure. So we'd like to see anything that you do with that be just as applicable to buildings as well, not just infrastructure, so the same kinds of ideas.
Thanks.
You can say who you are and what company you represent as well.
Hi, Rory Bergen, HTA. Have you an idea in your minds about the distribution of projects, small feasibility studies versus large projects? You know, have you a kind of a ratio between the two that you want to achieve? And secondly, as a minor question, are Scottish universities eligible to be an RTO?
So Scottish universities are eligible. There won't be RTOs because they're universities. In terms of the proportion, we do have some idea in mind. So there's a bit more money for 1-year projects and 2-year projects, and that's again down to the nature and the timing of the funding per financial year. For those who aren't aware, we do have per financial year funding agreements for the programme and overall as UKRI and Innovate UK. Treasury don't allow us to spend a penny over the budget, and they don't like us to come in more than 1% under budget. So that's when it sounds like we're putting up really silly timings and stuff, it's because that's what the funding profiles we're trying to hit. So yeah, we've got some idea. So yes, there's more money available for the 1-year projects and 2-year projects, if that's the basis of the question.
Hi, Christian Zajak, K-Labs. Can you actually define the definition of infrastructure? Is it infrastructure supporting the construction companies, for example, back office software, etc., or is it the infrastructure that goes inside the building? For example, equipment that's installed as part of the structure of the building.
I don't think we're too interested about the fit out of a building. We're talking about the built environment itself, yeah. But
George and the blue jacket. Then do you want to come in next? You can run back to Jenny then as well.
Hi there, George Klatt from Contilia. One question on the project. In case we had like a construction project abroad, but we do a lot of technical feasibility work, development in the UK, and we're all UK based and have UK partners, is that okay? Is that eligible?
So we would, if for the project itself, that we would like to see that it carried out in the UK and exploited within the UK. If you do have stuff that is exported, we do like to see that as well. But the main point of the project is that it's exploited and carried out within the UK.
Okay, so probably to be more precise, so let's imagine you have a construction site outside of the UK, but we do the testing, the development in the UK, work with project partners in the UK. How would you react to that?
I guess it's down to how well you justify it. So it's how the benefits, really what we're looking here is how the benefits are going to accrue to the UK economy. So if you can make it very clear that that's what's going to happen and it's UK businesses that are benefiting and going to grow from it, that's great. Obviously, you're missing out a little bit on the social impact side of things for the UK if the benefits of the social impact of it are going to be abroad. So it's how well you can justify that, really.
And that's something you should justify within the application. So with your route to market, how you tend to exploit it, that's how you should, and that's what assessors will look for.
Alarms about to go off, so you can let me scroll sound in the next 10 seconds or so. Try and squeeze you in then, Jenny, with your question before the alarm sounds.
I have 4 questions.
4 questions. Right.
Okay, so the first one, I'll go fast. First one's,
Not fast enough.
Great timing.
that happens to me a lot. Okay, so Raphael Capini asked, what metrics will we be comparing our projects to? So, for instance, if we need to increase productivity, what are the current levels of productivity that you're using as the baseline?
So all of those Construction 2025 targets are based on 2010. But of course, it's relative productivity. So productivity is, hopefully, although it hasn't been lately, increasing for the sector. So we're going to be trying to work with the Construction Leadership Council and the sector deal to look at what the baseline productivity is. With any kind of thing that we measure, it's all relative to non-intervention. It's not just absolute measurements. So when we're looking at the performance, say, of a business that we've funded versus one that we haven't funded, we do look at projects that went ahead without our support, which might be unfair, but it's the same kind of thing here. It's against a trend baseline. Not all of that stuff is in place yet. We are still trying to work up the evaluation framework in a rigorous way, because it'll all be done by independent bodies, not ourselves. But yes, try to look at relative productivity. So I think we've probably got some data somewhere on current kind of productivity levels we can maybe share.
Really,
yeah,
if there's some links we can send them.
yeah.
And then from John Moore, he's a startup sole trader, but he's not registered at Company House, so can he apply?
So you need to be registered on Company's House. I've got a little power mic on. Yeah. So you need to be registered on Company's House in order to receive a grant. You don't need to be registered at the time of application. And he can be registered, but he can be registered as a sole trader or as a startup. That's fine. We fund plenty of startups.
Lovely. And then a question from Andrew Stewart. Are projects related to existing building stock or retrofit allowed, or is this purely for new build? They're a software simulation company for energy modelling, and they do things like EPC compliance. So that's the thing they do now, so they're wondering if that's in scope.
Yeah, so as we were quite clear, retrofit is not in scope. We are looking at kind of new build projects for the way we're going to demonstrate a lot of this. That's not to say we don't think retrofits are at all important, and maybe further down the line other things will come along in that. Clearly, if you're doing a project on how you might apply life cycle monitoring to a building, it might help if it was already been built. So in that respect, we'd understand how we justify testing that kind of material on an existing building, but we don't see that as retrofit. But so retrofit itself, so how you would take an existing building and solve the problems of it, are out of scope. As I said, it's not that we don't think that's important, and perhaps that's something we will look at in future waves. And that's basically because we think we probably ought to industrialise the sector first before we take on a more complicated challenge that needs an industrialised approach.
Last one then.
Okay, last one for now. So Graham from Digital Construction asks, are we allowed to include various digital tools in one project, or do you have to focus on one digital tool for your project?
You're absolutely welcome to include various digital capabilities in companies. Thank you.
Okay, back to the floor then. Switch that and then Neil.
Hi, Phil Pittman-Costain. Just referring to the financial, the cost of it, you mentioned the project cost. I'm assuming you mean the project cost of of our intended project, not the project we're testing it on?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Just want to check. Cheers.
And just to remind people on that total project cost thing, we don't think we ever emphasise it enough. So the total project cost is the entire cost of doing it, not the amount of money you're claiming from us. So when we say up to 1 million total project cost, we mean the entire cost of the project. It's a bit easier to look at it that way. If you want to fall outside those areas, as we've said a few times, please do contact us beforehand. We'll need it justified.
Hi, Neil Appleton, National Composite Centre. 2 questions. The first one's easy. Is there an SME required to be within each project team? Second question, a little bit more involved. Are you looking at traditional Innovate core levels of technological risk innovation within this, or is it subtly different?
In terms of the SME involvement, yes, there has to be an SME in the consortium. Absolutely. In terms of the different technological innovation, it's quite a broad range, because we also have included in the scope business model innovation, for example, or supply chain innovation. So, yeah, it's different levels. I don't know whether you want to.
Yeah, just on risk. So the question's a bit about risk as well. We still want high-risk projects. When people complete the risk table, we're not looking for you to say this is really low risk. If it's low risk, why would we be paying for it? You know, the idea is we want you to take a project that's a bit forward, a bit scary for you to do, and we'll pay half the costs if you're able to take it forward now, rather than waiting a couple of years and until everyone's done it.
Helen Mulligan from Cambridge Architectural Research. You mentioned briefly, Mike, and whizzed over the slide. Is there an issue if we're still involved in an ongoing Innovate UK project that we can't apply to this one?
No, if it's a different project, no problem at all.
Jason, and then this chap here.
Hi, Jason, yep, Drawboard. So we're a small software startup, and I just wanted to understand a little bit of the difference that you put in your funding. I know there was a different funding you could claim for research versus experimental work. For a digital technology company, a lot of research we might do actually involves building something experimentally. So what is the delineation for us?
The difference between experimental development and the other cases. Experimental development is pretty much applying existing knowledge. So it's really quite advanced near market stuff. So it's trying something that we already kind of know what to do. The other categories are more about development of that knowledge to be applied.
Okay, so hypothetically, if we developed a prototype for something and we were testing it experimentally, but it was new in that sense, that would still be the research.
Yeah, there's some very clear descriptions of it on the guidance for applicants, but that's broadly what we're talking about. So it's taking something that's already existing and applying it. It's got a lower fund independent rate because it kind of exists and has been proven. The risk is lower. The bigger the risk, the more costs we pay, basically.
Simon Barnes from the University of Kent. You mentioned cross-sector collaboration. Do you have any particular sectors in mind? And could you perhaps give us an example of what you're looking for from those cross-sectoral collaborations and how they might work in the forms of a proposal?
Yeah. So the 4 we talked about, really. So apart from the construction sector, we're very interested in digital, energy and manufacturing businesses bringing their knowledge to bear on these challenges. We think, or we know, the best innovation comes at the interface between disciplines. So that's really what we want to kind of see here. So we want the manufacturing sector's version of manufacturing for construction. We want the digital sector's version of digital construction. We want to take the very best current ways of doing things out there and bring that into the construction sector. I think you might struggle to do a project without a construction business, perhaps. And really what we're going to want to see there, we expect quite a lot of the best ideas and knowledge and existing technology will be with small or medium-sized businesses within those areas. And the route to market, the very clear way in which it will be exploited, which is a big criterion in how we look at your project, is probably going to come through an actual builder. that's why Michael was going over. We stress again the scalability part as well. So we really want to see sort of ideas where it's quite clear within your project how that can be scaled. So again, that's coming back to that route to market. How is this actually going to be exploited?
John Taylor, TR Control Solutions. I'd just like some clarification, Mike, from your response to a gentleman over here's question earlier. You talked about you distinguish between the built environment and fit out. You said this is concerned with the built environment, not fit out. What do you mean by that? Do you mean it doesn't include the installation and commissioning of the HVAC systems, lighting, etc.? Does it exclude that, or is it that's part of the...
I think if it was solely on that, I don't think we'd be, the case is a little bit weaker because, again, if you look at the objectives we're trying to deliver, it's kind of hard to deliver well on those if you're just looking at the fit out of a building. But obviously that's an important component in delivering a building on time, at lower cost, et cetera, and it may be an important part of the whole life cycle performance. So it's how you can justify your project as delivering on those objectives in a scalable way. So it really just depends on how you're able to justify that. So I won't say it's out of scope, but I'm saying if it's purely on fit out, we're probably, the chances of it being quite so applicable are reduced. So it's a value judgment.
Okay,
Is that a bit clearer?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Sorry.
Any more from the floor? Are there any more questions online, Jenny? No more online? No, if there's nothing more. Is there anything
This is
else?
how efficient we are. We're very efficient to get it all across and ahead of time.
Yeah, doing really, really
33% reduction in cost and time deliveries. Practicing what we preach.
Just, as you get a bit of time there, about subcontracts. Subcontracts, some things you need to buy from overseas. Thank you. Yeah, so it's Nigel Wall, smart glazing. If we need to get sensors and so on, we're buying in from overseas, maybe get them constructed overseas, but the purpose is to use them in the project, then that's okay to subcontract purchase?
Yeah, if you genuinely can't source that expertise or that equipment in the UK, then you can subcontract overseas. Really, with subcontracting, that's for people that aren't going to benefit from the project. So subcontracting should only be used then. Otherwise, why aren't they a partner? Why aren't they part of it if they're not going to be? So if they're, say, a UK supplier making sensors, then, this is a new application area for them. They should probably be a partner rather than a subcontractor. But having something kind of made bespoke that needs bringing into a project, that's probably where you should be using subcontractors. I think, again, justify the use of a subcontractor. And if it's really only overseas you can get it, make that case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would then own the design, but have it made. So it would, the design would be done here, but manufacture it.
The IP's with you, yeah. Start another round of questions now, haven't we? I'm going to give this time to our other speakers.
Hello. Hi, my name is Hassan Beg. I'm from the University of Exeter. And Hi, my name is Hassan Beg. I'm from the University of Exeter and also from a spin-out called as Build Solar. My question, again, a follow-on to what the previous gentleman asked is, whenever we have a partner maybe outside the UK, there is always a danger that the IP crossover and issues wherein our own IP that is within the UK, if it's basically a subcontractor, then basically they don't have any right over the IP. Whereas if they become a partner, then they can be a potential IP issue that can come in place. So how do we resolve?
Well, you can have partners from outside the UK, they just can't receive grant funding. So being a partner, you can work in that way.
Right.
And it may be they want to contribute something towards the total cost of the project in in-kind value. The IP situation gets addressed in the collaboration agreement, which was stressed by our colleagues here. So if you've dealt with that in advance, then the IP issue should all be sorted.
Okay.
But yes, of course, if they're subcontract, the IP is a bit different. But the IP will probably stay with them in that case.
Okay.
Right, we have another question online, I believe, from Jenny. So if we just bear with Ray a sec. He's earning his money today.
I am. Michael Sampson's asked, do the panel think that the 33% cheaper, 50% faster and 50% lower carbon targets are simultaneously achievable?
In one project? Well, we'd be very interested in that project, obviously. What I will say about all those targets are they are stretch targets, I would suggest. However, in some of the work we did in building up for this program, we've seen examples of existing projects that have taken some of the approaches that we consider important within this and have achieved those kinds of levels of performance. Not all in one project entirely, I think. I think the bigger and more integrated a supply chain project like that could be, the more likely you're able to achieve that. But yes, these kinds of things are achievable in some of the case studies that we've seen. And should we want to see those kinds of things measured at the project level and shown that it can be scaled up?
Take heart, Mike, because last week, one of the attendees from last week has told me that we're being too weak and they're setting far too low targets, and in Scotland they've been doing this for years. And we should reduce our London arrogance and take heed of what they're doing north of the border.
Well, I don't live in London. So, yeah, fine. If you want to surpass them, then please do. We would love them to be surpassed.
It's only a minimum.